This is The World This Weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, fighting continues in Sudan despite a truce designed to allow civilians to flee to safety.
My parents got to a point where they were essentially starting to come to terms with the fact that there might not be an exit for them and that they might, die there.
Also tonight, the U.S. raises concerns about its northern border.
The challenge of migration is a hemispheric one, and hemispheric challenges require hemispheric solutions.
Why American officials want Canada to impose visa restrictions on Mexican travelers. And ahead of King Charles' coronation, a renewed push for some crown jewels to be returned to the countries they came from.
We're not doing this for any money. We don't take any donations, nor awards or rewards. Our only reward is to bringing the gods back home.
That's later, but first. Canadian military officials say the situation in Sudan remains extremely dangerous. The violent power struggle between two military leaders is now in its third week, and fighting is raging despite a ceasefire extension. Countries have been scrambling to get their citizens out, but as Philip Lee Shannock reports, some Canadians still face a difficult road to safety.
You heard missiles falling. You felt that shaking within the apartment as well because it was quite close.
Back in the safety of her Mississauga, Ontario home, Dalia Abadi recounts her escape from Sudan with her parents. She says when hostilities broke out 3 weeks ago, she immediately reached out to the Canadian consulate but didn't hear back for days.
My parents got to a point where they were essentially starting to come to terms with the fact that there might not be an exit for them and that they might die there.
Finally, she got an email from Global Affairs Canada, and the family headed to an airbase near Khartoum where they were able to get out aboard a German flight. Since then, there have been 6 Canadian military airlifts carrying not just 400 Canadians, but citizens from other allied countries.
Yeah, I would say that the ceasefire has effectively collapsed.
But Vice Admiral Bob Ochterlony of the Canadian Joint Operations Command says due to fighting near the Khartoum airbase, airlifts from there are over.
Even yesterday, our flights flew into a contested airfield with significant amounts of small arms fire in vicinity, but they still flew in and evacuated the Canadians.
Defense Minister Anita Anand says Canadian government personnel are moving operations from Khartoum to Port Sudan on the Red Sea, and that the hundreds of Canadians hoping to leave could find help there.
Canada and our allies are continually assessing how we can assist our citizens and examine all options, including potential options in Port Sudan by air and sea.
But the 800-kilometer trip from the capital to Port Sudan is dangerous, warns Sebastian Beaulieu of Global Affairs Canada.
Evacuation by road from Khartoum is a 30-hour journey with many risks along the way.
He advises Canadians to make their own decisions whether to attempt the trip. For those willing to try, Canadian Forces General Wayne Eyre says there may be an option.
So the U.S. has organized a series of multinational convoys from Khartoum to Port Sudan. I talked to my U.S. counterpart about this a couple of days ago. Seats are open for Canadians.
Canada has 2 Navy vessels deployed in the region ready to help, and Canadian immigration officials and Global Affairs Canada will use Port Sudan as their base of operations, while Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is in Kenya to help coordinate rescue and humanitarian efforts. Philip Lee Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, as you heard, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is in Kenya, which borders South Sudan. CBC senior correspondent David Common is also in Kenya to cover the crisis. I spoke with him earlier. So, David, first of all, why Kenya?
Well, for a number of reasons. First, it is a power broker on the continent, and so working through Kenya to try to first get more of a ceasefire and then get some sort of negotiations going between these two parties, Kenya is key to that process. But it is also for Canada where all those Canadian diplomats who were working in Khartoum, they're now based here rather urgently, of course, evacuated themselves, pulled out to here, also to Djibouti, that tiny nation where a lot of the military evacuation flights have been landing. And then, of course, when those people, those evacuees land in a place like Djibouti, they have to go onwards. So where to? If they're heading back to Canada, they're likely doing so by commercial means. They may be routing through Nairobi. They may be coming and staying in Nairobi. And so Kenya is very much a hub in all of this crisis right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that those evacuations from Sudan by air are over, what do we know about any plans to bring back Canadians and permanent residents of Canada who are still trapped in Sudan?
So we know of more than 200 people who've put their hands up, said, I want out, Canada, please help me, who have not yet got out. There are very few options left. They all involve driving in a bus, on a motorcycle, in a car, or potentially a military convoy. So, for instance, the U.S. military was able to move people. It's about 30 hours from that capital city, Khartoum, to Port Sudan along the Nile, where there are ships, military ships, as well as civilian ferries that have been taking people across on a 12-hour crossing to Saudi Arabia, for instance. Others have been going by road to neighboring countries, but there is a significant influx of people doing that, borders that are overwhelmed, and that's assuming you can even get there. Lots of gas, lots of violence on the road, lots of roadblocks. So the question for many is, can they even get out of their homes?
Mm-hmm. And then with so many people fleeing to neighboring countries, as you say, what are some of the concerns you're hearing about how those countries will cope?
These are countries that in many cases are already experiencing humanitarian crises. And so this just exacerbates that. It will also quite likely exacerbate the movement of migrants. For instance, those who travel to Europe, who take those extremely dangerous journeys across the water because of so many people who are now fleeing a very populous nation in Africa as it descends into civil war. You are seeing huge numbers of people moving into camps that were not refugee camps even 2 weeks ago, even a week ago, and now they are.
All right. CBC senior correspondent David Common in Nairobi. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
The United States wants the Canadian government to impose visa restrictions on Mexican nationals. At issue is the number of Mexicans illegally entering the U.S. through its northern border. As Kate McKenna reports, the request comes as President Joe Biden faces increased political pressure to protect U.S. borders.
We've been focused on our borders, our land borders, both south and north, for years.
That northern focus has officials like U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas looking to Canada. In an interview with CBC's chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton, he confirmed the United States has asked the federal government to consider changing its policy and reimpose visa restrictions on Mexican nationals who visit Canada.
We talk about this issue and many issues that impact the migration of people.
Mexicans don't need a visa to travel to Canada, but they do need one to go to the United States. U.S. officials worry Mexican nationals could travel to Canada and then cross illegally into the United States via the northern border. American authorities intercepted about 2,000 Mexicans trying to do just that in the last 6 months, a tiny fraction compared to the number of Mexicans who tried to cross through the southern border, but concerning to Americans nonetheless.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America.
Now that U.S. President Joe Biden has confirmed he's running again, some observers say he's facing pressure from inside and outside his party to be stronger on border control. Nicholas Wu writes for Politico.
This is an issue that American politicians and those here in Washington have been talking about for some time. It's an issue that tends to divide Democrats between the more progressive and more moderate factions of it, and something that Republicans see as political ammunition to use against the president in an election year.
Canada used to require Mexicans to get a visa to visit. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper imposed the rule in 2009. He said it was necessary to stem the flow of asylum claims from Mexico.
It is simply a control measure when we have problems in the refugee system.
But during the 2015 election campaign, Justin Trudeau was critical of the visa system, saying it hurt tourism and Canadian economic growth.
Canada needs to do right by our continental neighbours, and part of that is removing the visa restriction on Mexican citizens.
A year later, he removed those restrictions. A senior Canadian government source confirms that U.S. officials have brought the issue up multiple times this year. But a statement from Canada's Minister of Immigration's office says despite American concerns, it has no plan to reimpose the visa requirement. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Fratelli e sorelle, essere in uscita.
Pope Francis presiding over an outdoor mass in Budapest. More than 50,000 people attended the service behind Hungary's parliament building. The Pope ended his 3-day visit with a plea for an end to the war in Ukraine. He also urged people not to shut the door on migrants and foreigners, a stark contrast to the position taken by Hungarian President Viktor Orban. The Pope's trip to Hungary is his first after being admitted to hospital for bronchitis last month. To Texas now, where an urgent manhunt is expanding. Authorities are widening their search for the man accused of fatally shooting 5 people in his neighbor's home. As the CBC's Katie Simpson reports, investigators are desperate for new leads after hitting a few stumbling blocks.
Police vehicles come and go from a hastily set up command center in the small rural community of Cleveland, Texas, about an hour's drive north of Houston. More than 200 officers are going door to door, talking to local residents, searching for any information on the whereabouts of 38-year-old Francisco Oropesa, hoping an $80,000 reward will generate credible tips. FBI Special Agent James Smith admits investigators don't have any leads right now.
We're asking everyone for your help so we can bring this suspect, or this monster, I will call him, to justice.
Police dogs lost track of Oropesa's scent on Saturday after muddy, wet conditions hampered the search. Investigators lost more valuable time after mistakenly releasing an incorrect photo of the suspect. A picture shared by the FBI on social media was not of Oropesa, but instead an innocent truck driver from the Dallas area. The suspect is still considered armed and dangerous. Alejandro Mayorkas, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, says his agency is monitoring developments.
It's a horrific crime, and I can assure you and the American people that law enforcement will deliver accountability.
The attack happened late Friday night in what apparently started as a dispute over noise. Police say Oropesa had been firing a gun on his property when a neighbor asked him to be quiet because a baby was sleeping. Oropesa refused, allegedly storming his neighbor's house armed with an AR-15 style rifle, shooting and killing 4 young adults and an 8-year-old boy. The child's father returned to the scene sobbing as he told reporters his son and wife are dead. San Jacinto County Sheriff Greg Capers says a school vigil is being held today for the youngest victim.
My heart is with this 8-year-old little boy.
All of the dead lived in that home and were members of the Honduran community. The country's foreign minister, Enrique Reina, demanded on Twitter the full weight of the law be applied against the person responsible. Local authorities want the same outcome, but they have to find the suspect first. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Well, spring has long since sprung, and summer is right around the corner. But for Albertans, it's election season. The campaign has unofficially been underway for weeks already, but tomorrow will be the official kickoff. Our Alberta reporters, Aaron Collins and Julia Wong, tell us what to expect, starting now with Julia on how the leaders of the provincial NDP and UCP are pitching themselves to voters.
Please welcome the next Premier of our province, Danielle Smith.
It's been a remarkable comeback for Danielle Smith. From the political wilderness, she became leader of the United Conservative Party and Premier. It was nearly 10 years ago.
Today, the PC caucus welcomes the leader of the Wild Rose, Danielle Smith.
Smith crossed the floor to the Progressive Conservatives. That move later cost her her seat, and the domino effect of all that led to Alberta's first NDP government in 2015, led by Rachel Notley.
I think we might have made a little bit of history tonight.
Now both women are vying for Alberta's top job.
You have 2 political parties now having a really good chance, both of them, to actually win the election.
Political columnist Graham Thompson has reported on the Alberta legislature for decades. He says there's a difference in how the parties are approaching the campaign.
The NDP want to push Notley as Rachel's team, the NDP, whereas the UCP really doesn't want to push Danielle Smith because she's such a divisive figure.
From comments about the COVID unvaccinated in her first days as Premier,
they have been the most discriminated against group that I've ever witnessed,
to a leaked recorded call with a criminally charged pastor.
The political decision that initiated this
but it can't be a political decision to end it. That's what I'm finding very frustrating about the whole thing.
Thompson says Smith's biggest challenge is herself.
She says these things, does these things, gets her in trouble.
Smith came to power with the help of the UCP's right-wing base. Now she's trying to appeal to all Albertans. We sat down with two undecided voters in Stony Plain, a bedroom community of Edmonton.
How are you guys feeling as we go into this provincial election?
It's an interesting time.
Matt Schellenberger is a cattle farmer and the chair of the Regional Chamber of Commerce. He's voted for both parties in the past, but is undecided right now.
There are specific policies and specific messaging that will probably drive my vote. And they're both on the economic side as well as the people side.
Stay-at-home mother of three, Katrin Thompson, says the party's platforms will be a deciding factor.
My whole family is heavily into oil, so I would like to lean one way, but I have young children and nieces and nephews in the school system, and they require something else. And those two things seem to be at odds with the growth of the province and the way the province should go.
Typically, a party in Alberta wins if they can win 2 out of these 3, Edmonton, Calgary, and rural Alberta. The NDP currently have almost every seat in Edmonton, while the UCP represent rural Alberta. That leaves Calgary as the battleground.
I'm Aaron Collins in Calgary, where the campaign has been heating up for weeks.
Wish you well.
Well, thanks so much for saying hi.
And I'll like to get a sign out.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Here at this coffee shop, Jason Copping is holding court. The Calgary Varsity MLA and UCP candidate chatting with a constituent, but with one eye on a yet-to-be-announced election. Copping, the current health minister, won this seat by just over 600 votes.
It's likely going to be tight this time, fairly close.
Copping's United Conservatives won 23 of 26 Calgary seats in 2019, and he thinks his party's record will help them take the city again.
Growing economy, jobs, diversification, balancing the budget, which allows us to invest in things like education and healthcare and supporting those most in need.
To win the coming election, the UCP will need those Calgary seats, and so will the rival NDP, setting up a political showdown in Cowtown.
We're calling it Battleground Calgary.
Janet Brown is a Calgary-based pollster.
Whichever party is going to win this election is going to need to win at least 18, 20 seats in this city to be able to form government.
Both parties have already spent a lot of time and money in the city. UCP leader Danielle Smith offering up more than $300 million to support a new pro-hockey rink if she's elected.
May 29th, I'm hoping Calgarians give our UCP government a clear mandate to proceed with this arena deal.
Not to be outdone, Rachel Notley's NDP are offering $200 million for a university campus in Calgary's core.
If elected, we will get to work right away on this project.
And NDP candidates have been knocking on doors in the city for months. Dr. Luann Metz is the new Democratic candidate in Calgary Varsity, going head-to-head against the health minister.
I'm coming to say hi and see what's important to you.
I work for Unison at Kirby Centre, so I'm all about seniors.
Well, Metz has been campaigning for 2 years, and just like her opponent, she likes her party's chances in Calgary.
People really feel that they have a choice because there isn't a clear winner or loser. And so they can really vote for what their values are.
This is a sneak peek of this campaign, one fought door to door. And over coffee for the next 4 weeks. The winner of Battleground Calgary likely to win 4 years in power in Alberta.
That was the CBC's Aaron Collins in Calgary. Before him, you heard Julia Wong reporting from Edmonton. And 3 communities west of Edmonton are under an evacuation order because of an encroaching grass fire. The RCMP says the fire is fueled by high winds and headed towards the hamlets of Entwistle and Evansburg. It also affects Yellowhead County. People have been advised to collect important documents, medication, and enough food and water to be away for at least 3 days. Temporary evacuation centers have been set up in each community. When King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla are crowned next Saturday, one of the United Kingdom's most prized crown jewels will be nowhere to be seen. The Kohinoor diamond was taken from India in the 19th century, just one of many cultural artifacts Britain now has. Salima Shivji tells us about the fight to get those treasures back.
The mantras ring out
at a temple deep in Tamil Nadu, India's southeastern state. But one of the most important Hindu rituals hasn't been performed at the Sundar Garumal temple for decades now, ever since the temple's god was stolen. Without our god's statue, this temple has lost all its glory, the priest Arava Mudin says. We feel helpless knowing a part of our family has been taken. The 15th century bronze statue was snatched and carted off by smugglers in 1957 and is still on display a world away at Oxford's Ashmolean Museum, even though the English Museum has added a plaque acknowledging the bronze may have been stolen. I don't know why or how it went to Britain, this worshipper at the temple says, but everyone knows it rightfully belongs to us. It's not an isolated case, one of thousands of temples plundered across India. So these were stolen?
Yeah, these were stolen against the laws of the land.
It's the ultimate insult for Vijay Kumar as he walks through a green space full of what he calls colonial loot. He works in shipping but moonlights as an amateur art sleuth for his group, the India Pride Project, corralling a crew of volunteers who painstakingly track down stolen artifacts in their free time.
We are not doing this for any money. We don't take any donations, nor awards or rewards. Our only reward is to bringing the gods back home. So this was a small clue.
The sleuths are meticulous at piecing together clues, and they've had success at persuading museums abroad to do the right thing and urging law enforcement to do more. They've brought back more than 600 lost treasures to India in the past decade.
There's the crown, and it has the Koh-i-Noor diamond.
What's not part of their focus is the most disputed of India's lost jewels, the Koh-i-Noor diamond. The jewel set in the crown belonging to the Queen Mother, and now, with Charles as king, passed on to Camilla, Queen Consort.
Many countries lay claim to that diamond.
India chief among them. The clamor to bring the diamond home has gotten louder in India, particularly in the days after Queen Elizabeth II died, with the refrain, "Now can we get our Koh-i-Noor back?"
It has come to represent a very cold, hard reminder of colonialism.
Anita Anand, historian and journalist, co-wrote the definitive book on the diamond's controversial history.
There is a new appetite to revisit these things right now. And the shiniest thing that you've got in this conversation is the Koh-i-Noor that sat in the Tower of London, that gleams with a reminder of, for Indians, the humiliation of the Raj.
And the humiliating memory of how it landed in British hands, Anand says, with the last Maharaja of Punjab, 10 years old and isolated, coerced into handing it over.
Unless a gift is given at the point of a bayonet, this can't be considered a gift. It is one of the spoils of conquest.
But any talk of returning the Koh-i-Noor is fraught with diplomatic minefields. The messy question of which country has the most valid claim to it, for one. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. There's also the British Museum Act, which doesn't allow objects in national museums to be removed, and a UNESCO convention that stipulates anything that was looted should be returned, but only if it was taken after 1970. The royal family is hyper-aware of the diamond's power. Camilla won't be wearing the Koh-i-Noor crown in next week's coronation. And mere weeks after Charles is crowned, the Tower of London will display the Koh-i-Noor and label it a symbol of conquest. A smart move, experts like Anand say, but one that has its limits.
The idea that just by moving it out of the spotlight was going to make people forget about it, I think is not right.
The capping stone of colonial oppression loot. And
for Vijay Kumar and the others dedicated to restoring this country's stolen heritage, the long-missing diamond still stings. But he says the precious bronzes command his full attention.
The Koh-i-Noor is just a stone to me. Our gods are priceless.
Priceless, but so many thousands of them still lost, leaving the faithful bereft, praying for their return. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Chennai.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Radio-Canada has learned Quebec's Highway 50 is going to be renamed in honour of hockey legend Guy Lafleur. The former captain of the Montreal Canadiens died of lung cancer last year. The highway runs through his hometown, Thurso. The official announcement is expected at an event in Thurso on Thursday. In Listugush First Nation in Quebec, fewer than 300 people speak Mi'kmaq as their first language, and most of them are over 60 years old. One man is keeping the language alive using a radio station he built himself in his backyard. The CBC's Alexander Silberman tells us his story.
Floyd Metallic is comfortably behind the microphone in his tightly packed, shed-turned radio studio.
We're going live.
It's 9 o'clock on Friday morning. Time for his popular We Speak Mi'kmaq show to go to air.
The Reds, 93.5.
I just want to welcome everybody, and I want to start speaking Mi'kmaq right now.
Metallic turns to greet his two guests, and a lively conversation quickly fills the room. They're talking about everything from playoff hockey to childhood stories, all in Mi'kmaq. It's one of the few places Mi'kmaq speakers and those learning the language can hear it on the radio. The show draws more than 1,000 listeners from Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. After a career as an iron worker, Metallic wanted to bring his first language to the radio.
Mi'kmaq language is a passion for me. We grew up in a household where no English was spoken.
Metallic started in his basement with the transmitter attached to a pole for his clothesline. It was initially a pirate station, meaning it broadcast without a license. But with a little help, the station applied for one and moved to the backyard shed. In 2017, CJRZ 93.5 FM went on air officially.
It's good to just be able to go on the air and just talk to people and feel like they're listening to you.
Floyd Metallic is 65. He's part of the last generation in Listugush to be raised entirely in Mi'kmaq.
If we put it on the air over here, we'll might be able to help bring it back.
There are fewer than 300 people left in Listugush who speak Mi'kmaq as their first language, or about 10% of the community. Most fluent speakers are over the age of 60.
It's very rare that I meet somebody that speaks Mi'kmaq.
Vernon Metallic is a regular on the radio. He's now helping his son learn and remembers a time when speaking Mi'kmaq in schools was banned. It led parents to speak to their children only in English.
We'd get punished. You get hit in the back of the head, you get slapped, and it was crazy.
It's 10:40 now. Floyd Metallic and his guest have been talking for nearly 2 hours. He decides it's time to sign off for now. As Metallic hangs up his headphones, his next challenge is finding new guests. He hopes it won't be long before one of his young listeners will come join him.
Goodbye, and hope to see you next week.
Alexander Silberman, CBC News, Listugush First Nation.
Let me tell you how it will be.
They say there are only two certainties in life: death and taxes. And the time has come for the latter. Despite petitions and pushes to extend the deadline due to 35,000 Canada Revenue Agency employees striking, it remains today. And since today's a Sunday, it's actually tomorrow. It's one of those things we've all got to go through, and you can remind yourself it's for the greater good, which is the message of the song "I Paid My Income Tax Today," commissioned by the U.S. Treasury Department in 1942.
I paid my income tax today. I never felt so proud before to be right there with millions more who paid their income tax today.
Johnny Cash's take on taxes was a little different.
'Cause from them total wages earned down to that net amount that's due, I feel a painful sense of loss between the two.
While most of us will get it together by the deadline, not everybody does. Avoiding your taxes is obviously not recommended. The CRA says 140 people were convicted of tax evasion between 2017 and 2022, resulting in court fines and jail time. French actor Gérard Depardieu wanted to avoid taxes so much he moved to Belgium and became a Russian citizen. Willie Nelson, who turned 90 yesterday, made an album about his nearly $17 million tax bill. 1992's The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories?
Who'll buy my memories of things that used to be? This is a collection of songs that's very special to me, and I hope you'll enjoy listening to them as much as I enjoyed playing them for you.
Playing them to earn money to pay off his debt.
To order Who'll Buy My Memories, call 1-800-652-4500.
who'll buy my memory.
Luckily, a lot of people did want to buy Willie Nelson's memories. He was in the black by 93. That's one way to win over the tax man. The Beatles took him on in a song.
Should 5% appear too small?
So whether you filed months ago or you're scrambling now, at least you won't have to think about doing your taxes again for another year. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.